Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this episode and the next two episodes, actually, they're going to be coming back to back. We're doing something a little bit different here. The NACOR exams are just around the corner, just about 2 weeks away now. And I've had several students reach out to me and tell me that they're feeling a little stressed. They're not really completely feeling prepared. So I've decided to jump into the computer, do a tutorial, kind of like an overview of what you should be preparing for the exam. So, contrary to what I normally do on the channel where we're doing like, specific concepts and going through an exact presentation step by step, we're doing something a little bit different here. So if you are an ABO student, this is not necessarily, specifically tailored towards the ABO exam. It's actually specifically tailored toward the NACOR exam in Canada. However, if you have ambitions to do the practical examinations for the ABO and stuff like that, this is definitely something that is going to apply. Not exactly in the exact steps that I discuss in this particular lecture. However, definitely something useful for anybody who is interested in opticianry and refining their skills and moving on to the next level. So you're going to see in this video that I started off expecting to do this whole thing in one shot, but then it got really long. So I split it in two different videos. So and I don't even want this intro to be super long because the videos are already quite long and I want you to be able to get through it pretty efficiently. However, you're going to notice that the first video is going to cover the eyeglass examination part. And then I cut the video, and in the second part 2 is going to cover the contact lens portion. So there's two videos back to back. Again, the link to the second video is going to be in the description. I hope you enjoy it. I know we're getting a little bit tight here. We're getting 2 weeks left until the examination. We're doing this video exactly for that reason. Just to give you a little bit of like peace of mind and knowing that you've got this. You can learn all these things in the next 2 weeks. And plus, you've been at this for some time now. You already have the foundation. This is just kind of streamlining your studying efforts to make sure that you're studying the right things and not focusing on things that aren't necessarily that important at this point in the game. All right, I hope you enjoyed the video. And again, if you have any questions, and I'm going to mention this again within the lecture, if you have any questions about anything, drop a comment in the comment section. I get notified all the time, so I will jump in and answer so that everybody can see the answer too. So if you contact me directly, that's great too. However, not everybody gets the benefit from the answer. So if you have any questions, any concerns, or anything of the sort, drop it in the comment section and I will answer immediately. I'll be keeping an eye on this all the way until the final hour to make sure that I could support every student in any possible way. All right, I hope you enjoy this lecture. Hey guys, and welcome to the review, our NACOR exam review. So I've had a lot of students reach out saying they're a little stressed and that they need a little bit of help getting ready for the exam that's approaching, less than 2 weeks now. So just thought I'd do a little bit of a lecture. Originally, I had anticipated maybe doing a Zoom call and having everybody in on it. However, given the shortness of time and how long going through the whole review could be, I just figured I'd streamline it, do it in a video. And of course, if you have any questions about anything, you could always reach out to me in the comment section, or you can even send me an email. I'll include my email in the description as well. So anyways, why don't we jump into it? If you are an American student, which most of Modern Opticians programs are tailored to, this is not necessarily specifically for you, although the things we're going to be reviewing this apply to opticianry as a whole, especially if you anticipate challenging the practical exams. This is something that you're definitely going to be interested in and a great way to kind of get your ducks in a row as far as preparation. All right, let's jump into it and see how quickly we can get through this. And before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick disclaimer. This is not an official NATE, College of Opticians, or OAC workshop. This is being done completely independently. Do not assume that anything I say here is a representation of what those organizations are kind of putting forward. And always remember that if you want official information on anything as far as information regarding the exam, you always refer to communications from the OAC or the College of Opticians. And you make sure that that is your primary source. I just wanted everyone to be very clear on that I'm not doing this on behalf of any of those organizations, doing this under the Modern Optician label. And it's a completely independent source of any of those organizations. All right, that was just a little bit of legal. Now, let's move on. And just a quick bit of information for those of you who are new to the channel and who haven't actually encountered any of our material yet, just let you know who Modern Optician is or what it is. Modern Optician is your source for all your resources you need when pertaining to optician training. We have a number of workbooks and study guides and everything you would need to get prepared, and that applies to students who are studying for the ABO National Opticianry Competency Exam in the US, as well as Canadian opticians who are preparing for the NACOR exams too. So if you have any desire to kind of dig deeper into this material, head on over to modernoptician.com, and it's pretty easy to find all the programs that can help you get to your goals. All right, now we're done. Let's jump into the actual lecture. Okay, let's take a look at what we're going to talk about today. Obviously, we're going to be going through all the materials of the NACOR exam and exactly what you should be studying and how you should be prepared. We're going to talk a lot about mindset because I think that, this is something that's overlooked quite often, where this is a big exam and this is stressful. You've been working 2, 3, sometimes more years towards this. And sometimes a little bit of, someone in your corner trying to give you a little bit of motivation and encouragement is actually extremely helpful. And of course, we're going to cover the topics that you need to prepare for the exam. First of all, as we all know, this exam is kind of sectioned off into 2 different parts. The eyeglass exam, we're going to cover all the sections from basic dispensing and lens finishing to lens duplication, measurement, verification, and service. And we're also going to cover the contact lens exam as far as keratometry and RX interpretation, the pathology, the verification, insertion, removal, which interestingly is dropped in this year's exam, but we're still going to talk about it a little bit, and of course, the follow-up section. One thing that I definitely want to iterate here, and I'm going to reiterate it over and over again, is you cannot take either one of these lightly. I know that most students are very focused on the contact lens exam because it's something that they find more challenging and maybe have less experience with. You can't overlook the eyeglass exam. There's actually, challenging parts to this, and you don't want to glaze over it and all of a sudden feel like you've left things out, and you don't want to do poorly on the eyeglass exam and load all your learning onto the contact lens portion. So this is something we're going to repeat over and over again throughout, and especially when we're talking about the eyeglass exam portion, which is going to be what we're going to be talking about right now. And actually, I lied a little. Before we get into the eyeglass portion, I do want to touch on mindset, which I think that is extremely overlooked. Let's go through a few points that I want you to just remember before you jump into all this stuff. And, keep it in your back pocket. Something that's really, really important to know that, your mind is the most powerful tool in all this. And sometimes the stress can get to you. So just remember, this is a challenging exam and that you have to put some effort into studying. Now, I'm not doing this to stress you out if you feel like you haven't studied yet or enough yet. However, you just got to make sure that, you're putting the right effort in. And with that said, however, it's never too late to buckle down and cram. With 2 weeks left, there's lots and lots of time. So we're going to be going over all the skills and the concepts that you need to know for this exam. You can pull this off in 2 weeks. So if you're feeling a little stressed and behind, you've got time, but we need to put the effort in right now. Now, this is a practical exam. It's testing your ability to do the things that opticians do. So focus on the technique and the confidence that you need more than the theory. Now, of course, the theory is still important, so still cover the theory because it ties into the technique. However, you shouldn't be sitting here reading textbook pages and notes over and over again, as much as you should be practicing the exact skills, things like lensometry, things like taking measurements. All of these things are what you're actually being tested on. So yes, there are some theoretical parts of the exam, so you definitely have to touch on the theory, but the exact techniques and the things that you do with your hands as an optician, this is what's being tested. This is a practical exam, so make sure you focus on that. Now, the other thing is to not put too much pressure on yourself. You have to enjoy this to a certain degree. I know none of us enjoy doing exams and tests and stuff like that, but the more pressure you put on yourself, the harder it's going to be because, there's nothing worse than feeling stressed and tense all the time. And one thing that I wanted to give you a little bit of a pointer is the day of the exam or leading into it, don't change your habits. Do the things you normally do. Eat the meals you normally eat. Some of you will be traveling from out of town to do this exam. You might stay in a hotel. Don't mess with your sleeping patterns. I got a funny story. A friend of mine wrote this exam, and she decided to eat something completely different the night before, and she ended up having some major issues, some bathroom issues the day of the exam that she absolutely did not need to add to her plate. So a little pointer: don't change your habits. Eat well, get some rest. I would even say the night before, you've learned what you need to learn. Don't cram, all the way into the wee hours of the morning. Have some confidence in your learning and the work you've put in from this point until then. And when you're doing the exam, your body language is a huge indicator of your confidence level. Make sure you smile, make sure you show confidence, make sure you stand up tall. You would be amazed on the impression that you will have on the examiners when you are confident. Now, don't be overconfident, don't be cocky. However, if you look like you're second guessing yourself, if you're shaky, it has a huge impact on their impression of how good of an optician you will be. Remember, we're being tested here to make sure you can do your job with confidence and safely. So of course you have to be kind of an expert and know exactly what you're talking about. However, the examiner wants to make sure that you can do this safely. They're not expecting you to be a complete expert yet. They know you're just a student. However, if you can do this confidently and safely, you're on the right track. And once you do it, celebrate completing the exam. This is you've gone a long way here. This is multiple years of studying, of preparing, and then, multiple weeks of cramming. You gotta, give yourself a pat on the back and be pretty proud of what you've accomplished. So these are just a few mindset things that you need to, get yourself ready for. And last but not least, the elephant in the room: what if I don't pass? I know this is a creeping kind of thing in everyone's mind, and I want to put an end to it right now. If you don't pass, it's not the end of the world. You will not be the first or the last optician to not perform well on the exam. Now, we're trying to prepare ourselves here, and the work that we put in is going to try to make sure that we avoid this. However, don't put so much pressure on yourself. If it doesn't work out this time, it will next. So get that out of your mind. It's not the end of the world, and it's not embarrassing. There's plenty. I'm sure you've encountered opticians who didn't pass the first time. It's not the end of the world. But we're going to work hard today to try to make sure that you do get it the first time. All right, let's move on. All right, part one. We're jumping into the eyeglass theory, and you'll notice I've written here, do not take this one for granted. Yes, we do a lot of eyeglass stuff in our day-to-day work in the dispensary. You might feel pretty confident with it, which is awesome. However, we do pick up some bad habits. Sometimes we take some shortcuts. The exam is designed to make sure that you know your stuff well. So do not take the eyeglass portion for granted. Every year, there's people who do not perform well on the eyeglass side. And I bet you most of those people walked in thinking that they were pretty confident and were doing pretty well. So I know the temptation is to focus all your energy on contact lens. I'm not really sure why that is. I think there's this feeling out there that the contact lens portion is the more challenging portion of the exam. Maybe because there have been historically more people not do well on it. You don't want to be in a situation where you're not confident or not, proficient at the eyeglass portion. So we're going to be going through all this, and I want you to keep in the back of your mind, all this stuff is super important, and this is the kind of stuff that you should be practicing. We've got 2 weeks. We're going to practice this stuff starting, tomorrow when you head back into work. I want you to start practicing all these things. Now we're going to go through every single section one by one. All right, let's jump into the eyeglass exam section by section and see what it's all about. So this is taken directly from the handbook, from the NACOR handbook. Section 1 talks about basic dispensing and lens finishing theory. I'm not going to read through all this. Just in case you haven't actually downloaded, it's right on the NACOR website. Make sure you get the handbook and you go through everything, because it helps you understand exactly what's going on. And if you read through all these things, you're going to start to realize, like I was saying, it's not a lot of theory, and you could kind of figure out exactly which theories you should be looking at. So go ahead and read through that if you haven't yet. However, we're going to jump into a few things that a few concepts that we should be things to consider for example, to start. So the first thing you're going to really want to know in this particular thing is it's giving you jobs that you've ordered, and then a comparison of what you've received, and it's basically testing your ability to check jobs and to compare it to the ANSI chart and be able to decide whether you're passing or failing. So you should definitely know your ANSI tolerances, not by heart. However, you should be able to navigate that chart really, really well. Okay, so again, there's certain things that you, after doing for a while, you start to know by heart, but you're gonna have the chart. So just make sure you don't want to be looking at this thing like it's foreign. You want to be able to make sure that you know exactly where to find all the information and things like that. Keep in mind things like vertical imbalance as well. I just added this in because this is something that people overlook a lot. Checking, they're always checking for the PDs, they're always checking for the very obvious stuff, but always keep in mind that vertical imbalance is a really important one, and it's something that they may ask you, so you have to calculate. And remember that when you're calculating vertical imbalance, make sure that you're looking at the vertical meridian as opposed to the horizontal one. So always keep in mind your meridians when you're looking at things. Induced prism. So one thing that kind of catches people off guard sometimes is that the ANSI chart, especially for PDs and things like that, they're denoted in millimeters. However, as soon as you go over a certain prescription, higher powers, then all of a sudden it kind of flips from being millimeters to being the amount of prism that's induced. So you better be ready to calculate a little bit of prism just in case it happens. You don't want to be stuck in a situation where you're not really sure what to do. So keep in mind things to consider to have your prism calculations in the back of your mind in case you need to use them. And don't just focus on the prescription. Consider things like base curve, lens thickness, lens quality, seg heights, etc. All these things need to be checked. Of course, again, this is theoretical, but you compare the work order to the received job, and all these things are in play. So don't just focus on the prescription. And again, know your calculations. No Prentice's rule, no minimum blank size. All of these things are important. They may not be asked, they may be asked. So you better, if you're going to be focusing on anything theoretical or optics based in your calculations, do the ones that are listed in this description of section 1. So the concepts to review, definitely Prentice's rule. Remember in Prentice's rule that it's done in centimeters, not millimeters. The best thing to do here is practice and to do as many questions as you can that involve calculating prism. And who cares if you don't end up having to do any in the exam, at least you have prepared. And remember your base directions, plus and minus lenses behave a little bit differently, so review that. And also remember that if you're dealing with PDs, you're dealing with the 180 degree meridian. If you're dealing with vertical imbalance and things like that, you're dealing with the 90 degree meridian. Make sure that the powers, if you have to write it out in an optical cross, do so, just so that you can make sure that you are dealing with the correct power meridian and the correct powers in the equation. Calculating layout. This is something that I find a lot of students overlook. And especially if you're not doing fabrication at work, if you're not laying out jobs, or if your equipment is super state-of-the-art, which a lot of ours is, and it does it for you, calculating inset, if they're giving you frame measurements versus the PD, how much inset for the lens, how much outset if the PD is bigger than the frame PD. How about calculating seg height, seg drop, things like that. These are all little things that are actually super easy. Review those concepts because you may be asked, how much inset, it might tell you how much, because for example, if you're laying out a job, you need to know how much in or out it goes and how much up or down it goes from kind of like the datum line. So these are all things that could be in play, and they're definitely things that demonstrate that you know how to fabricate, you know how to make glasses. Calculating minimum blank size, and also important one in the dispensary. Let's say, for example, you're ordering a sunglass and it's a relatively small PD, like a large sunglass and a small PD. You need to figure out whether or not that this can be done in-house if the patient is like super eager to get their glasses, or if it's something important that they need right away, or if it's something that's going to have to be ordered from the outside and surfaced because the minimum blank size is just not satisfied. So these calculations, again, easy calculations, just make sure you review them, do some practice, and that way you're prepared in case it gets asked. And also know how to troubleshoot lenses. I don't think that this is necessarily going to be something in this section, but it doesn't hurt to know all your troubleshooting stuff just in the event, because you never know what can be asked in a multiple choice kind of theory question. So just be prepared for that kind of stuff. And again, practicing this, being close to your optician, your mentor, and listening to them troubleshoot lenses and doing a little bit of that yourself. At this point in the journey, you should be comfortable doing that on your own. So just kind of, lean on your knowledge, and again, be confident with it, and just kind of review all these things, and just be ready in the event that you have to troubleshoot a little bit. Some good exercises. Now, of course, we're going to be touching on every single section here. We're going to talk about good exercises, because it's just one thing to be covering the theory, but what kind of things can you do in the dispensary for the next 2 weeks that will make sure that you are ready for this practical exam, right? Because we want to make sure, we want to reiterate that this is practical. So what are you going to be doing to practice? Check jobs. You got to check jobs over and over and over again. Compare them to the ANSI chart. If you think that it's not right, check with your superior. Discuss it. Have discussions. This is where all these things come into play. And this is where you start to kind of feel more confident. If you check like 20 jobs every day for the next 2 weeks, excuse me, by the time you get to the exam, it's going to feel like a piece of cake. You're going to know exactly what you're looking for. I would suggest, if you struggle with prism, which most students do, calculate the prism of every single job. It's not uncommon for jobs to be off a little bit from the lab when you're verifying them. Even if they're off by 1 millimeter, by 2 millimeters, calculate the prism and figure out the direction. This is a great exercise, and then have your mentor check it. And that way you can feel confident that you've done this over and over again. Repetition is key here. So you're going to see lots of jobs coming through the dispensary over the next few days. Calculate the prism on all of them. We got to put the work in so that you feel confident. And after that, you never have to do this again. Well, I mean, with exception when it's necessary. Calculate the layout of every job. That even if you guys don't do any kind of edging in-house, even if you have edgers, but they actually do it for you, take a piece of paper and calculate how much in and how much up or down each job has to be, and that way it gives you a little bit of practice, even if it's not something you do every day. And calculate the minimum blank size of every single job, and actually look at, especially if you have jobs that are in cut, calculate the minimum blank size and look at the blank size that you're using, and compare. Take a look at how much sense it makes, right? And it'll give you a little bit of insight too, as to, especially in this, we're getting into sunglass season. If you're starting to notice, it might actually help you at work as far as realizing that, oh, wait a minute, this isn't going to be, we're not going to be able to cut this out. We have to order out and things like that. So these are all little things that you could do to practice. All right, let's move on to section 2. All right, then we're jumping into section 2 here. Section 2 is all about lens duplication. It's all about lensometry and measurements of the lenses. So in this particular case, you're going to have to neutralize 5 pairs of glasses, and that's going to include single vision, multifocal, and progressive lenses. So you're basically going to have to write down and note the exact neutralization, and you're going to have to be accurate. So a few things that we should be things to consider is, one trick that I've taught my students for years, and it hasn't failed them yet, is I would measure things in 1/8 diopters. The reason for this, and most of the time we know that we can, in the dispensary, prescriptions are written in quarters, we read in quarters, we do everything. However, when they're verifying that you've neutralized this well, there's going to be a certain tolerance that they're going to mark right or wrong. So, sometimes if we're out of practice, or if we're just a little nervous, we might be reading in between powers. We're not really sure whether it's a quarter. Let's say you have a prescription, you're not sure if it's a -125 or a -150, you're kind of in between. Record it in 1/8 diopters, right? Like a -1.38. Because this way, if let's say the tolerance is a 1/4 diopter, and you just happen to mess up and you're like a whole half off, if you're writing in 1/8, you're going to be a little bit closer to the answer. So I don't know if I explained that right, but I hope you get the kind of idea here, is that it's going to give you a little bit more wiggle room. And what if they're surfacing lenses for this exam, which I'm sure they are, they do have the ability to actually surface these in 1/8 diopters, and I wouldn't put it past them to do it. However, if the actual power on this lens is to the 1/8, I wouldn't expect it that way. However, the more so as far as a fail-safe to keeping you closest to the best answer. So record in 1/8 diopters where it's applicable. I mean, if you're reading it right bang on the 1/4, then record it that way. But it's a good idea to do the 1/8. Remember base curves? The base curves, the front curve, it's always a plus. This is kind of like a a low-hanging fruit, a gimme, but I just thought I'd write it down because I've seen people kind of mess that up. Um, Again, along the lines of measurement, your PD ruler goes down to the millimeter, right? But you can also estimate between millimeters to a half millimeters. Again, I would do it that way. You're measuring the PDs and you're measuring some, 60, you're not really sure if it, or monocular PD, let's say it's 30, and I would go down to 29 and a half if you feel like it's closer to that. The more accurate you can be, the less likely you are to get it wrong if you're just a little off. So, don't be afraid to go down to the half millimeter. And always remembering when you're reading powers, we do the back vertex power of single vision lenses, and even when we're reading progressive lenses, we're doing the back vertex power. However, in a segmented multifocal, remember to flip the glasses around, right? And this is something that I don't think a lot of students really practice very often. When you're reading the distance portion of the lens, you're going to read it back vertex power. So that means the front of the lens is facing you through the lensometer. However, and then you can record your distance prescription. However, when you're reading the add power of the lens, what you want to do is you want to flip it over. You want to read the front vertex power of the distance portion, and then the front vertex power through the segment, and subtract them, and there's your add. So very important to do that, especially for higher powers, because the front vertex power and the back vertex power actually do differ in power when you're measuring in a lensometer, especially in higher prescriptions. So, this is something that you definitely want to be doing. Not that anyone's going to be watching you, I don't think. I don't think they're going to be recording whether or not you're doing things right, but it's going to have an impact on your answers. So make sure you do it in that manner. And watch your math when you're noting the add power. This is a pretty easy one to get wrong, and it's also a pretty easy one to make sure you get right. So take your time, right? So you're practicing all these skills, all these technical skills that only you as a trained apprentice optician know how to do. You don't want your math skills to be what sinks you. So make sure that you take your time when calculating the add power, or even cylinder power, right? When you're measuring your sphere lines and you go down to your cyl lines. Take your time. Make sure that you're not mistaking it by a whole diopter or something like that, just out of stress and feeling rushed. Take your time when recording, because those are easy places to mess up that you probably shouldn't have, right? So make sure you watch your math. And check everything, make sure it's not a progressive, right? Because sometimes the markings might be hard to see, and sometimes, again, in haste, you're busy trying to get this done. You're in a hurry. You're kind of stressed. There's a few ways, right? First of all, look for engravings, obviously. Also, take the lens, look through it, and kind of move it over your piece of paper to see if there's any change in power from the top and the bottom of the lens. That's a great way of kind of confirming whether it is a progressive or if it isn't a progressive. So little tricks like that, because the last thing you want to do is assume something's single vision. Maybe it has a lower add. Maybe the add powers, sometimes the lenses might be edged weird where the the progressive is placed really low. You want to make sure that you're not missing anything. So that's a good trick, just looking through the lens, making sure there's no change in power from top to bottom, and just moving on from there and measuring it accordingly. Right, and progressive lens identification. I put in question marks. I've asked a few students over the last couple of exams whether or not they are having you identify progressives. And the general consensus lately, I could be wrong, I feel like no. However, I remember when I did it, and I did it a long time ago, I'm pretty sure we were supposed to somewhat identify it. But that could be very difficult nowadays. And if they don't make you identify, I think it's okay, because that could be a huge time drain. So just be prepared to, just in the event. But also when you're looking at the markings, you can identify the add right there. So that's something that helps. And don't assume that both lenses are going to have the same add, because that could be an easy trick that they can throw your way, that one lens might have a 250 add and the other one might only have a 2 add. Excuse me. So make sure you check the engravings on both lenses, to the temporal engraving giving you the add, so that you don't miss anything. Now, concepts to review in this is obviously lensometry. We just talked about certain concepts about back vertex power versus front vertex power for a segmented multifocal lens. Make sure you review those things. Like I just said, segmented multifocals. Reading progressive lenses. So, your major reference point, things like prism thinning and stuff like that. You want to remember, right, that when you're reading a progressive, there's likely going to be some yoked prism in there. So that comes from the prism thinning process. So when you're reading it, make sure you're reading it at the major reference point as well as the prism reference point, so that if there is prism in there, you can actually see it, because you're probably going to get quite often some base up prism in progressive lenses where you're measuring both at, let's say, 2 diopters of base up prism. That doesn't mean that there's prescribed prism in there. That's just part of the prism thinning. Both of those lenses, if they're on the same level, if they're both at the same level of vertical prism, that's actually absolutely fine. That's how progressive lenses read. However, when you're measuring it at the prism reference point, if those two lenses have a different level of vertical or horizontal prism in them, you got to note that, right? So these are concepts that you have to review and just practice, put them into the lensometer. Every progressive you measure, verify, and get familiar with what's normal and what looks normal. And you could compare the prescription and what you're reading, and it's going to start to make more sense. So this is something that over the next 2 weeks, do lots of. Stick these lenses in the lens meter and read them and get familiarized and comfortable with it. Base curve measurements, do it all the time. You got loads of glasses here. Get used to measuring base curves, and remember that, single vision lenses are a little bit easier to measure base curve. Segmented multifocals, be careful that your prongs on the lens clock are not hitting the segment, because it's going to throw you way off. Make sure to measure progressive lenses horizontally across where that prism reference point is, because obviously a molded surface, or even like, well, mind you, excuse me, conventional lenses will have a molded surface that if you do it vertically, it's going to be all messed up. A lot of these freeform lenses, backside optic lenses, are actually going to have a spherical front curve, which wouldn't necessarily matter which way you measured it, but don't get into the habit, measure it properly. And remember that aspherics could be a little bit more tricky. Make sure you're nice and straight and you're in the center of the lens. If you're a little bit off to the side, you're going to end up with some weird measurements as well. So practice measuring your base curves. Very important that you compare the work order when you're practicing to what was ordered, and making sure that you're getting things accurate, right? Or not, compare the work order to what your measurements are, and make sure that you're getting things consistently right. Now, good exercises for this. The number one exercise for lens duplication is what I call the secret job game. And I've done this with students over the years, and it really, really refines their skills. Think of it this way. When you're checking jobs and you have the work order in front of you, it's a bit of a lazy exercise, because you know exactly what you're looking for. Half the time you set the lensometer to the correct axis, and you play around back and forth just to see if it's coming in. You should be checking jobs blind, meaning you don't know what the prescription is. So you get plenty of jobs coming out of the lab or coming into the store that need to be checked. Take 5 of them every day, flip the work order over, and neutralize the pair of glasses with and don't cheat here, because you're only cheating yourself. Literally measure everything from scratch with no idea of what this is, and then flip the work order over and see if you've done it right. I find that this is such an easy exercise and such an intuitive one that makes sense to practice your neutralization skills, yet almost nobody does this. So you've got some time here. Neutralize as many pairs of glasses as you possibly can using the secret job game, and believe me, you're going to get better and better, and within a couple days you're going to start feeling pretty good. And if you kind of suck at it, don't worry about it. Keep practicing. Take a deep breath and do it over and over again. This is the time to figure out what you're good at and what you're not, so that you can get better over the next couple weeks. All right, section 3. Now we're going to talk about measurements. So in this section, you're going to be taking PDs. You're going to be taking PDs both with the pen light and ruler and with the pupillometer, as well as you're going to be taking a couple other measurements like vertex distance. And you're also going to be taking seg heights and OC heights for progressive lenses. And I think, let me just read, ask measure live model 2 pairs of progressive lenses. Actually, looks like, wait, can also be asked to measure, yeah, so for a progressive as well as a lined bifocal. So these are definitely skills that we need to practice and that you need to be good at. So things to consider: the pen light and ruler technique can be cumbersome if you don't practice enough. And believe me, I've seen enough students over the years to know who's practiced and who hasn't. It's not an intuitive thing, right? The way you hold the pen light over each eye, the way you hold the ruler, you can always tell when a student has been practicing this. So if you haven't been practicing this, you have 2 weeks. Let's get on it. Every single person you measure first, measure your colleagues, get with your mentors, make sure they critique you. There's nothing worse than just saying, yeah, it's okay, and it's not. So, refine the skill for like, take 15, 20 minutes to refine the skill with a colleague or a mentor, and then start doing it with patients. Because I would actually suggest that at this point in the game, heading close to the exam, drop the, I mean, no, I'm gonna, ideally do both the pupillometer and the pen light. But if you're short on time, if you're busy, drop the pupillometer for now and just measure with the pen light and ruler. Do absolutely everybody you can to get comfortable, because realistically the measurement here is not that complicated. It's just the technique, and if you look cumbersome and awkward, the examiner is going to notice. So one of the first things I tell people is take a deep breath and be confident. Otherwise, you're going to be shaky. You want to, even, when you hear the expression fake it till you make it, just go in there, especially with patients. I mean, I could see when you're doing it with, with colleagues, they might, they know what you're supposed to be doing. If you're doing it wrong, they may notice. Patients have no clue. So, for all they know, you could be measuring their eyebrows and they don't know. So don't be intimidated by the patient. Just go ahead and do it. And if you have time, of course, you want to be accurate because you're making people glasses. Use the pupillometer to check your answers and see how close you get. Ideally, by the time you get closer to the exam, you want the measurements that you're taking with the pen light and ruler to be identical to what they are in the pupillometer. And now also remember to give clear and precise instructions. The examiners are going to be looking for this. They want to see that you know exactly what to do and you're instructing the patient accordingly. Not only about where to look, obviously where to look. For example, when you're lining up, in front of them, you say, please look towards my left eye, please look towards my right eye, and so on and so forth. Also positioning the patient. If the patient's, holding their head a little too high or too low, you move that patient and you tell them how to position themselves and be assertive, be the professional, be kind, obviously. However, what they're looking for here is that you know what you're doing. And I wouldn't put it past patients to kind of hold themselves in a bad position, maybe not on purpose, but just naturally. You've got to move that person around a little bit to make sure that you're getting what you need, right? Again, like I talked about in the previous section, measure in 0.5 millimeter increments. That way you have a higher chance of being correct. And make sure that your pupillometer, when you're actually taking that measurement, is super firm and placed on the bridge, and it's like, and it's proper. Review those techniques of how to, get it proper. Sometimes you can even get the patient to hold on to it with you if it's a little shaky. Do what you got to do to make sure that this thing is on stable. And you don't want to be all willy-nilly and just kind of rush through it. Take your time and make sure it's nice and firm on the patient's face. This one, sanitize everything. In previous years, it would be something that I would really have to remind students. Now, I mean, with COVID protocols and things like that, I think we're pretty good at sanitizing things. Now, don't let this lapse because you're stressed. Clean everything. Use the alcohol wipes that they are provided. Clean your ruler, clean your pen, clean everything. The pupillometer, it doesn't matter. Disinfect. You cannot disinfect too much, so make sure you disinfect everything. You would hate to rub somebody the wrong way, especially during COVID. You know that examiners are humans. Some people are more sensitive to other things about how things are cleaned. You would hate to insult somebody by not being aseptic enough. So make sure that you clean everything thoroughly. Ask permission to touch the patient. I'm going to be placing this on your nose. Is that all right? I'm going to be touching your cheek. Is that okay? Especially, once again, with the state of affairs the way they are now, it's of utmost importance to be asking permission for absolutely every time you touch a patient. Now, we're shifting a little bit here about the actual techniques. And I'm sorry, I don't want to create any stress here. If you haven't used a dystometer before, I know these things can be a little bit harder to get your hands on. Get your hands on a dystometer. If I know we only have 2 weeks left. The concern I have is that if you're using a dystometer for the first time, without having touched it, you're probably going to look shaky and awkward. But if you can't get your hands on a dystometer, there's a few YouTube videos on YouTube that show the use of it. You're gonna have to fake it till you make it. My apologies. I really wish, and this is kind of the disadvantage now with the NATE program, is that they're not really offering students a whole lot of opportunity to use these things. And this year, I don't even think they had many workshops like they've had in the past that allowed them to go into Georgian or Seneca and actually touch some of this stuff and use it. So, I mean, anyways, if you got to fake it till you make it, it's not super complicated. Just, this is something you're just going to have to try to pull it off. Otherwise, if you have access to the dystometer, make sure that you get your hands on it and you work it. Remember, this is a low-hanging fruit again, something you don't want to mess up because you know what you're doing. I have confidence in you that you've been measuring seg heights and OC heights for a few years now, and you know what you're doing. Common mistake is not measuring to the bottom, the lowest part of the frame. Well, great example is in an aviator frame, right? And a smaller PD. The distance between, let's say, the lower lid margin or the pupil to the frame right below the pupil is going to be much less than what the bottom of the frame is. If you measure to the portion directly below the pupil, your measurement will be wrong. Make sure that you're extending that measurement right to the lowest part of the frame. Very easy thing to mess up, and you will get your answer wrong. So again, practice that. Make sure that you're measuring all the way to the bottom of the frame, especially, well, not especially, like always, but be especially careful if it's like an aviator style frame and the B measurement is not uniform across the whole frame. You want to measure to the lowest part of the B. And yes, we've already talked about this. Place your patient for optimal fitting. Get up. There's one thing that, I'm sure the examiners will be very pleased to see, that you're getting up and you're looking at the patient from the side, from the profile, making sure that frame is perpendicular to the floor when you're taking your measurements. Don't just sit there and look at them, because sometimes it's hard to tell. Get up, look at them from the side, make sure everything's straight, be deliberate, be cautious. Help them position their chin properly. If you have to actually, ask permission to touch their face and position themselves properly. Do all these little things. This demonstrates that you know the importance of position when you're measuring and that you're doing your job correctly. All right, so let's take a look here at a few other things. I just hit two of them, I'm sorry. Progressive addition lens, center pupil, and flat top lower lid margin. These are things that you should know already. Just make sure that you measure. Sometimes I know that, I've seen students, and I've even instructed students sometimes, you get little shortcuts, not shortcuts, but little tricks, right? Where sometimes, you'll fit a patient maybe a little lower than standard for a progressive, to try, based on their lifestyle, based on previous pairs they've worn and stuff like that. For the exam, measure it right to the center of the pupil. Do it right, and measure it from the center of the pupil down to the lowest part of the frame, and go to the lid margin for the lower lid margin, sorry, for a flat top. I don't think they're going to be doing the a trifocal in here, but also review your trifocal measurements as well, just in the event. And they're also going to get you to do a metal frame with a rim and one that's rimless. The reason they do that is because you have to keep in consideration that there's still some lens left over inside the rim, right? So you're going to add a millimeter if you're measuring from the top, from wherever you're measuring, for whether it's a bifocal or a progressive lens, you're going to add a millimeter to whatever you measure with a rimmed pair and measure right to the bottom of the lens for a rimless. So again, review those concepts, because there's a reason why they ask you to do these things, because there's little tricks that they expect you to know. Now the concepts to review, obviously distance versus near measurement techniques with the pen light and the ruler. How to position yourself in front of the patient, and make sure you practice these things, because you do not want to look like it's your first time doing this. Pen and ruler techniques, of course, and pupilometer as well. You want to make sure you're using it properly. Measuring major reference point placement, meaning the heights, right? So whether it be a segmented multifocal, whether it be a progressive lens, whether it be a single vision lens that you want to measure an OC, which nowadays you probably should be measuring an OC on absolutely everything based on lens designs and things like that. Make sure you review these concepts. For example, there's a whole chapter in systems for eyeglass system. What is it? System for eyeglass. The book by Borish, The Big Blue. So there's a whole chapter on that. So if you happen to have access to that, this is a great chapter to review. Again, I've talked about how this is not really time to be reading entire chapters, but this is a good one. But more importantly, you want to be applying these concepts. Aseptic technique, as simple and as it sounds, make sure you review and you remember how important it is to clean absolutely everything. Ask permission before you're touching patients, and so on and so forth. And again, review vertex distance measurements, especially if you do not have access. Try your best to watch video and see exactly how this is done so that you can fake it at least. And I hate to say this. I know that, at no point when we're doing an important exam like this should we be faking anything. However, we're in a situation now that if you haven't had access to this, and given, the current affairs, in today's day and age where, during COVID, you haven't been able to go to these workshops, in this case, you may have to. Good exercises, obviously, double measure everyone, make sure you do the pen, light, and ruler first and double check your measurements. And, yeah, just make sure you do absolutely as many measurements as you possibly can. Take vertex distance for everyone, if you can, and make sure you practice aseptic technique all the time, and you make sure you ask permission to touch your patient. Get into the habits that you will be tested. So this is an important concept to keep in mind, that you don't want to be using your old habits that we've kind of developed, and I have them too. We get used, we get a little lazy, or we get take shortcuts and things like that. For the next 2 weeks, you want to be perfect. You want to be doing things just like if you were being examined. And in that way, you're creating a pattern so that when you go and sit down, the last thing you want to do is all of a sudden have to implement these new patterns, these new techniques, these new habits for the exam. You want them to be kind of practiced. So make sure you're starting now. Everything you do is just like you're being examined. And of course, have your mentor double check everything, because this is the time to catch little mistakes at the end. As we're getting closer, you don't want to be carrying over any kind of errors in your measurements or your technique. Have your mentor follow you, and try to take your mentor to task, right? Saying like, listen, I only got a couple weeks left. Can we really focus on this? Can we really, you critique me, make sure that I'm doing this right. And it's going to go a long way in making sure that that you're being accurate and that there's no surprises when you get to the exam. All right, we're moving along. Here we are now in section 4, verification. And this is, similar to what we've talked about before. In this particular case, you're going to be verifying glasses. But this time, in comparison to section 1, where you were, comparing them based on theory and based on like little case studies, in this case, you're actually flat out going to do it. You're going to be given pairs of glasses, you're going to measure them, and you're going to verify them based on, ANSI, based on what is supposed to be provided based on what you've ordered. And so you're actually doing it in practice in this particular section. So things to consider is, of course, the ANSI tolerances, same concept as I talked about before. You do not have to know them by heart. However, you should be pretty darn familiar with navigating those charts. So I'm not going to, dig too much deeper into that, but make sure, once again, we reiterate, see, we're doing it twice now. We're doing it in section 1, and we're doing it in section 4. You don't want to be fumbling with the ANSI chart. Again, vertical imbalance, induced prism, the RX, everything we've talked about in section 1, measuring in eighth diopters, same idea. You want to make sure that you're doing all these things and that you're an expert at verifying jobs. And of course, same concepts to review as in section 1. You're going to, make sure that your ANSI chart, you're an absolute expert. And good exercise as well, check jobs until you're blue in the face, check, check, check. We have 2 sections here. If you think about it, you need to do well in every single section. You have 2 sections, section 1 and section 4, that are almost exactly the same. You better make sure that your checking skills are top notch, right? So check all the jobs that you can. Question everything that doesn't seem right. I know it can be a little stressful sometimes, and maybe the opticians in your office and people who work in the lab might look at you like, roll their eyes. If you're always like, criticizing every single job that comes through, but this is the opportunity to do so and question it, right? Say like, well, this looks a little bit out of tolerance. Is this something we should be dispensing? I mean, obviously what we're going to do at the end is at the discretion of the licensed optician. but at least it's going to cause or start a little bit of a conversation, and it could give you a little bit more insight as to the right process of checking jobs. And of course, get comfortable with reading progressive lenses, because it can be a little bit more difficult sometimes, especially with the prism induced. Check for prism, at the prism reference point. Make sure that you're getting your powers nice and crisp, and measure things like add powers with the segmented bifocals as well. Start measuring things like base curve and center thickness as your regular routine. We never measure these things, right? And it's something that you want to be good at. So make sure that your lens, whenever you're sitting down to check jobs, you've got a lens clock and you've got a thickness gauge ready to go. So you're measuring everything. And hopefully, if you have a work order too, that compares what it should be, especially on surface lenses. A lot of the times the work order will tell you exactly what was expected out of that as far as the thickness and the base curve. So make sure that you're measuring all of those things. And the secret job game is still a very good skill, because you know what? It's just kind of working backwards, right? You could basically do the secret job game where you're just blindly verifying these things, flip the work order over, then see what is supposed to be there, then compare it to the ANSI chart. So you basically are preparing for 3 different sections in one activity. So if it hasn't been kind of a take home point yet, the secret job game is definitely one of the best things you can do to prepare for the eyeglass exam, because it covers so many different competencies that you need to know. All right, here we are in section 5, the last section, the service section. So in this section, the candidate's given a metal and plastic frame that's messed up, right? That's out of alignment, and you're going to be asked to bring it to alignment. And then we're going to have to adjust it to a live model. I don't really know if they're doing that this year. My apologies. I'm not 100% sure. It doesn't hurt to practice this stuff, because at the end of the day, you know what, whether they're doing it or not, the things that they are not doing in this exam this year, great. I mean, it makes it a little bit easier on you. However, you still need to know how to do these things. So I would still practice this stuff. However, definitely focus on the standard alignment, because you're definitely going to have to do that. And I mean, adjusting glasses to patients all the time by this point, I certainly hope you are. I mean, these are things that you should be practicing and making sure you're doing a good job. So you got 2 weeks to do a really good job of this. No more quick and easy, or not easy, but quick and ineffective adjustments. Make sure you take your time with all your patients now and adjust things like nose pads and stuff. Anyways, we're going to cover more of that in this slide here. So things to consider is when you're taking the frame to bench align it, you're going to check for every possible alignment problem. Review all the different steps of alignment. Make sure you do them in order as well, because if you don't do them in order and you start messing around with things, as we all know, you're going to start messing with other things, other types of alignment, and you're never going to get to where you want to be. So make sure you follow the steps, just like I wrote here, in the correct sequence of adjustments, right? So review those. Use heat when appropriate, but careful not to overheat, right? I just want to make sure here that they are giving a plastic frame. I imagine they are metal and plastic, yeah. So you don't need any heat on the metal frame. Make sure you bend it carefully and you don't break it. And don't use too much heat on the plastic frame, because the last thing you want is all of a sudden it's a plastic material that doesn't really take heat well, and all of a sudden it just turns into like a hot mess. So use what you need to, and again, practicing at work is going to give you a little bit more feel for what is appropriate. Don't forget your nose pad angles. That's something that students struggle with sometimes. Review your nose pad angles. You want your frontal, your vertical, your splay angles. You want all these things to be properly adjusted. So these, this is not as hard as what some people make it out to be, especially in the bench alignment. You just want to make sure the nose pads look good, because they'll be looking at that, making sure it looks all right. Check for rolled rims, right? So sometimes if it gets real messed up, the rim, especially in a plastic frame, can get all rolled, and that can be hard to fix. So just be careful that not only are you checking to make sure it's not rolled to begin with, be careful that you're not rolling it when you're doing it, when you're bench aligning it. Otherwise, you might have a hard time getting it back. So be very careful of that. Obviously, when you're inserting, because that's part of it too, will be in part C, the candidate will be required to insert a pair of lenses into a plastic frame and a single lens into a nylon mount. These things, be careful not to chip the lenses. Be careful, use the proper practices. Use a little bit of heat for the plastic frame because we don't know what type of lenses. I would hope that they're like poly or high index so that they don't chip. However, you never know. So make sure that you treat it like it is something that can chip. So, be careful. And again, don't force the lens into the frame, right? If it doesn't look like it's going in easily, use some heat, take your time, be careful. And yes, remember concepts like 3-point touch, the fitting triangle, proper down bend, proper nose pad fitting, all the things that are important. The reality is that we get used to adjusting patients' glasses and we use their satisfaction as a benchmark, right? Maybe you're really good at keeping people happy and you're adjusting the frame just good enough so that they feel pretty good about it. However, that might not be good enough for what's expected in this exam. So make sure you follow the principles, not too much bearing on the side temples, the concept of 3-point touch where it touches at the bridge and just over the ears. Things like that, you want to make sure that these things are satisfied, not necessarily what your patients seem to be happy with, but the proper techniques and that apply to the theory of proper eyeglass adjustment. Now the concepts to review, which correlate very well with the things that to consider, your steps and bench aligning a frame. Don't go willy-nilly all over the place. Follow the steps in the proper order and you're going to be a lot better at doing it. Proper insertion techniques, making sure that you're doing things in the right way so that you're not going to leave yourself prone to chipping lenses or damaging rolling the rim of the frame and so on. Your adjustment techniques too, proper down bend around the ear, proper nose pad angles, things like that. Review these things, and this is something that you don't have to spend like loads of hours on, but just review them and make sure you're applying them as well, right? Good exercises is to have your colleagues mess up some donation frames. So hopefully you have like a donation box or something of the sort, or just some old frames, maybe a frame graveyard, where you can have somebody mess up the frame for you. And have them do their worst, mess it up real bad. Well, within reason. I mean, we only had 2 weeks here, so I mean, maybe they mess one up real bad just for jokes and to laugh about it. However, have them mess it up in a way that you can actually bring it back, right? I don't think it's very useful for you to have to spend an hour on something that can't be revived. So make sure that they're messing it up. The pad angles, the frame, the splay. The open angle and all these things on the frame, both plastic and metal frames. Make sure you get a bunch of them all messed up so that you can bring them back to true, and it's great practice. We don't necessarily do this every day, right? There's situations where people bring in messed up frames. However, are you going to encounter more in the next 2 weeks? Who knows, right? So, it's best to kind of put yourself in a situation where you get some practice. So have somebody mess up some frames for you. Adjust frames to your colleague's face and have them critique it. Patients are not necessarily going to be the best judge because they don't know what a proper adjustment is. A lot of the times, better than what they're wearing is good enough. However, you want to make sure that somebody who knows what's being looked for is actually critiquing your adjustment. This is, I haven't mentioned it yet, but this is not a good time to let your pride take the best of you, right? I believe that you know what you're doing. If you've gone this far, you're pretty good at what you're doing. However, all of us have little things that we can be better at and that we need to improve on. Don't be insulted if people are critiquing your work. If anything, be happy that you're getting it out of the way now so that it's not, the exam's not where this stuff's all coming out. So, don't be insulted. Just, take the constructive criticism and make the adjustments. And don't take your adjustment skills for granted. How to say this? I don't want to insult you or anything. Not a lot of us aren't as good as we think we are, right? Especially early on. There's little things, because I've mentioned that patients aren't going to tell you that you suck. Well, sometimes they will. However, you're not, sometimes you can do an adjustment that's kind of incorrect and the patient's still happy with it. Problem is examiners are looking for proper adjustments. So don't take it for granted. Allow your colleagues and your mentors to critique you, and practice, practice, practice. Do lots of it. And again, we only got a couple weeks left. You can still pull off. Hey, you can do 5 pairs a day. Even we just talked about everything in the last 5 sections. You could literally do the secret job game on 5 pairs. You can have 5 pairs messed up, and it only takes maybe a couple hours, spread out throughout the day. And you could do this, for the next 10 days over and over again. That's a lot of practice, man. So don't feel like you're down and out if you haven't gotten all this stuff done yet. You can still have time to do it. So yeah, so that pretty much concludes the eyeglass portion. And now we're like approaching an hour here, and I get it, I know it, but I hope that this is going to be a little faster. We still have the contact lens one to do. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to stop this video right here now, because it's kind of hard to go through a 2-hour video, and I'm going to post the eyeglass portion as part 2 to this. I'm sorry, the contact lens portion as part 2 to this, so that at least we have 2 different videos, and we can easily navigate. Because if you want to go back and look at things, I don't want you to have to go back through a 2-hour video. So anyways, they'll both be posted at the same time. So if you've started watching this one and you want to move on to the contact lens one, just make sure to check. It'll be linked in the description. And I'll mention it in the next one. All right. So thanks for joining me in this one. Sorry, I didn't mean to be all kind of helter-skelter there. I'm just basically deciding this on the fly. However, I'll see you in part 2, and I'm sure it'll be very shortly. All right.